Hello, my name is Milo, and I will be accompanying you throughout tonight's journey. In this video, we will gently move through the deeper layers of Carl Jung's psychology, especially shadow work and the unconscious forces behind those who leave you feeling energetically drained. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And tonight, we will look together at that unconscious space, the place where exhausting interactions are not only caused by others, but arise from the shadows within the psyche itself. Jung reminds us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The people who exhaust you the most do not simply take your energy. They awaken parts of you you have never dared to face, shadowed aspects waiting to be acknowledged. In this video, we will enter the depth of shadow work, not to accuse anyone, but to help you understand yourself, to understand why you feel drained, why you stay, and how to reclaim authority over the energy of your own life. But before we begin, allow your body to soften into the bed. Feel your breath slowing down, gentle, still. You no longer need to try. Just listen. Just be here. If at any moment you feel yourself growing sleepy, allow yourself to drift into sleep. The journey into the darkness and back into the light begins now. Part 1. Psychic energy and why we feel drained. There are moments in life when we walk away from a conversation feeling as if a part of our life force has quietly disappeared. No one insulted us. No one mistreated us. And yet, something invisible reached inward, touching the inner world, leaving us hollow, weakened, as if the internal source of energy had been drawn down to its lowest point. Carl Jung described this sensation as a sign of a psychic transaction, an unconscious exchange of psychological energy between two human beings. To understand why this happens, Jung insisted that we must first understand psychic energy, libido, not as mere sexuality, as Freud described it. For Jung, libido is the living current that animates all movement within the psyche: thought, emotion, creativity, the unconscious, will, intuition. It is the life force within the psyche itself, the substance from which motivation, vitality, connection, and the ability to live authentically arise. Jung wrote, "The libido is a psychic energy which manifests itself in the life process." Collected works. Valid. This means that whenever we feel drained, it is not imaginary. It is a sign that our inner flow has been blocked, depleted, or redirected towards something or someone without our conscious consent. And very often, that destination is another person. Why do some people exhaust us more than others? In Jung's psychological world, energy does not move only within us. It moves between us. When we encounter another person, two psychic fields come into contact. They overlap. They exchange unconscious information and energy. When this exchange is balanced, we feel nourished. When it is distorted, we feel empty. What is crucial here is this feeling drained says far less about the other person than it does about our own energetic boundaries, about how we manage and protect our libido. Jung once wrote, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling." Collected Works, Volume 11. When our inner energies are not aligned with our emotional truth, we become easily destabilized by the presence of others. Energy is lost when we are not centered in ourselves. In analytical psychology, the self is the deepest center of the psyche, the point around which everything revolves. When we are not rooted in that center, we unconsciously hand our energy to others in exchange for safety, validation, or the feeling of being enough. Each time we trade our inner presence for approval, acceptance, or emotional peace, our libido leaks outward like water pouring into a bottomless vessel. We are not drained because another person is powerful. We are drained because we have forgotten our own center. Without boundaries, energy is automatically extracted. A person with a strong inner world, solid psychological boundaries, and a conscious relationship with the self can preserve their energy in any interaction. But a sensitive person, someone overly empathic, conditioned to please, or shaped by environments where survival depended on meeting others' needs, often develops a porous psychic structure, easily absorbing, easily giving, easily drained. Jung described this loss of boundaries as participation, mystique, an unconscious state in which we dissolve into the other without realizing we are losing ourselves. When this occurs, we unconsciously invest energy in others, even when it is not requested. We become a reservoir for emotions they discharge, and we are left depleted. Why does someone's mere presence exhaust us? Because they do not approach us through words or actions. They approach us through the unconscious energy field. A person who is internally unstable, directionless, burdened with unresolved anxiety, or disconnected from their own shadow, emits a chaotic psychic frequency. And if we are highly sensitive, we absorb that state like a sponge. Jung described this phenomenon as psychic contagion, the transmission of psychological energy. It is invisible to the eye, but unmistakable in the body. The heart races, the head grows heavy, the breath shortens, the mind becomes foggy, the body weakens within minutes. These are signs that libido is leaving our center. Energy is drained. When we overfunction for others, some people exhaust us not because they actively take energy, but because we deplete ourselves to sustain the relationship. We try too hard. We listen beyond our limits. We carry emotional responsibilities that are not ours. Jung called this psychic overcompensation, the excessive investment of energy to preserve harmony, stability, or another person's sense of safety. The cost of this compensation is deep, invisible exhaustion. Energy is lost when we live away from the self. Jung stated, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. Collected works." Vampirism. 7. Only when we live from this center do we retain our energy. When we live through the persona, the social mask, through the need to be loved, or through the fear of abandonment, we move away from the self, and libido begins to drain. A person who exhausts us does not cause this distance. They merely reveal it. This is not a sign of failure. It is a moment of awakening. So, how do we stop being drained? Not by avoiding people, not by blaming those who are labeled energy vampires, but by turning inward and observing the flow of energy within ourselves. We are drained only when we are not centered. We lack boundaries. We fail to recognize our own emotions. We do not know where our libido is flowing. We give more than we can sustain. We seek validation outside instead of within. When psychic energy is returned to its rightful place, those who once exhausted us lose their power. We do not close ourselves off from the world, but the world no longer consumes us. In conclusion, feeling drained is not a sign of weakness. It is a message that we have moved away from our truest self. It is the call of the self, urging us to return. And only then do we fully understand Jung's words. The energy of the psyche is not lost. It is only transformed. Collected works. Volunt. Psychic energy never disappears. It is simply waiting to be brought back to its rightful center, where it belongs. If this first part helps us recognize how psychic energy operates and why we become exhausted, the next part widens the picture, revealing that those who cause our energy to leak are not villains, but individuals who lack the inner resources to sustain themselves. They do not need to be judged. They need to be understood. And we need to be protected. Part 2. Energy Vampirism. When those who lack within feed on those who are whole. Within, when we understand the mechanics of psychic energy and recognize that the feeling of being drained does not come from weakness, but from how our inner energy is managed. A new door begins to open, a door that allows us to see a broader picture of the unconscious interactions taking place between human beings. And from here, we enter a deeper territory of Jungian psychology, the realm of those who are lacking within, whose inner world was never fully formed, and who therefore unconsciously rely on the energy of others in order to survive. The transition from the first part to this one is entirely natural. If the previous section helped us recognize the flow of energy within ourselves, this section helps us understand the other who is unconsciously interacting with that flow. The issue is not only that we are being drained, but that someone else is sustaining their inner deficiency through that very energy. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances if there is any reaction. Both are transformed." Collected Works, Volume 17. When a person who is whole within encounters someone who is lacking within, that reaction is often imbalanced. One is lifted upward, while the other is pulled downward. The unindividuated person, a fragmented psyche, without the capacity to sustain itself. In Jungian psychoanalysis, individuation is the process of becoming a whole human being capable of self-regulation, emotional self-nourishment, and meaning-making. But not everyone enters this process. Many people grow older in years, yet inwardly remain fragmented, like pieces that were never assembled into a coherent whole. They do not know who they are, do not know where their emotions belong, lack a guiding center of being the self, and possess no inner source of energy to stand on their own. As a result, they must rely on the outside world to feel that they exist. They depend on praise to feel valuable, on attention to feel safe, on the presence of others to feel complete. These individuals do not intend to harm anyone, but they live in a state of energetic deficit, and from that deficit, they become vulnerable to unconscious possession. Jung stated, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Collected Works, Volume 11. And when a person persistently avoids their own soul, they will seek another soul to cling to. Emotional, psychic. Vampires, not malice, but unconscious. Hunger. The concept of an energy vampire is not meant to judge, but to describe a very real psychological mechanism when the inner world lacks nourishment. The ego seeks external sources to fill the void. This is when a person becomes someone who constantly needs encouragement, someone who always needs explanations, someone who requires constant soothing, someone who needs you to absorb their emotional unloading, someone who needs you to stabilize them when they are chaotic. They are not evil. They are not malicious. They are simply lacking, and that lack creates an unconscious pull. A person who has not individuated carries an inner emptiness. That emptiness resembles a bottomless well. No matter how much energy you pour into it, it sustains them only briefly. Then they need more. Jung explained this phenomenon through unconscious possession, when a split-off, unintegrated part of the psyche takes control of the individual. Those who lack within do not realize they are draining others. What they feel instead is anxiety when you fall silent, emptiness when you do not respond, panic when you withdraw, and stability only when you return. Unconsciously, they begin to experience you as a source of life. Why do the whole within attract the lacking within? A deeply Jungian paradox is this: light always draws the shadow. When you possess inner stability, the capacity for deep listening, emotional maturity, and nourishing psychic energy, you become a psychological refuge for those who are fragmented. Your inner fullness activates the emptiness within them. That emptiness seeks to fill itself by attaching to you. You become a temporary life source that allows them to keep going. This does not mean you are superior. It simply means you have moved further along the path of individuation. The danger lies here. They do not know what they are doing. At the unconscious level, those who lack within do not think, "How can I drain this person's energy?" They think instead, "I'm afraid of losing them. I need them to feel at peace. I am not okay if they are not here." What they desire is not your energy itself, but the sense of safety that your energy provides. And this is why it is never enough. The more you give, the more they lack. The longer you stay, the tighter they cling. The more you withdraw, the more they panic. Not because they are bad, but because they have not yet learned how to stand on their own inner ground. How to exit this cycle of energetic drain. Not by abandoning, not by cutting ties, not by fighting, but through awareness, seeing clearly, setting boundaries, and reclaiming your energy for yourself. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Collected Works, Volume 11. But it is not only the other who must learn self-acceptance. You must also accept that you cannot save the entire world. Once you return to the center of your own being, the leaking of energy begins to heal. You are no longer pulled into emptiness that does not belong to you, and you no longer unconsciously become someone else's source of life. After understanding those who are lacking within and how they unconsciously seek the energy of those who are whole within to fill their void, we move deeper into a more subtle mechanism of the psyche projection, the act of casting disowned parts of oneself onto another. If the previous section explained why they cling to your energy, the next reveals what they do with that energy. And it is precisely this intersection that creates the invisible chaos that exhausts us without explanation. So let us continue. Part 3. Projection, when they use us as a mirror for their wounds. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Collected Works, Volume 17. But when we are the one being projected upon, this statement is anything but gentle. It places us in the position of carrying another person's unconscious, turning us into a mirror that reflects what they refuse to face within themselves. What is projection from a Jungian perspective? Projection occurs when a person does not recognize or refuses to recognize the disturbed, unresolved aspects of their own psyche. Instead of looking into the darkness of their inner world, they cast it outward, placing it onto the person closest to them. That projection may consist of their insecurity, their fear of abandonment, their shame, their anger that has never been released, or the shadow they persistently deny. They do not say, "I am afraid." They say, "You make me afraid." They do not say, "I am angry with myself." They say, "You make me angry." They do not acknowledge the inconsistency within their inner life. They accuse you of being unstable. Projection allows them to preserve their self-image by making someone else carry the fracture. Jung described this with stark clarity. The most dangerous psychological mistake is the projection of the shadow onto others. Ion, Collected Works, Vol 9. I and I, and when this happens, we become the target of unconscious chaos spilling out from within them. When they use us as a mirror for their wounds, a person who has not individuated resembles a shattered mirror, unable to see themselves as a whole. The scattered fragments reflect a distorted image of who they are, and when they look at us, they do not see us. They see only themselves reflected back. They use us as a living mirror to test their self-worth, soothe their fear of rejection, prove that they are right, deposit the shadow fragments they cannot accept, regain a sense of control when their inner world feels chaotic. And we, those with a more stable inner world, tend to listen, to support, to hold space. We do not realize that we are becoming a container, a vessel for another person's emotions. A container is never full. It only holds until it becomes heavy and sinks. We are exhausted, not because they are too strong, but because we carry too much. Projection causes us to confuse their emotions with our own. Feel responsible for repairing pain that is not ours. Attempt to explain, persuade, or save them. Repeatedly ask ourselves, what did I do wrong? Or blame ourselves when, in truth, we are simply standing in the wrong position. What drains us is not their behavior, but the unconscious burden they place upon us. Jung once expressed this insight profoundly. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Modern man in search of a soul. The emotions they assign to us never truly belong to us. They only fit their wounds, not ours. Why are those with rich inner lives more vulnerable to projection? Ironically, the more sensitive, reflective, and inwardly strong a person is, the more likely they are to become a screen onto which others project their shadows. Why we listen without judgment. We remain calm enough for others to unload without feeling threatened. We create a safe space for their fears to emerge. We become a place where they can discharge without destroying their self-image. But the cost is that we receive what was never ours to carry. We leave the interaction, the conversation, the relationship with an inexplicable heaviness, a sadness that does not belong to us, an anger that did not originate within us, a confusion that is foreign to our inner world. We become disoriented because we are carrying the emotional weight of two people. How to know you are carrying someone else's. Projection. You are carrying projection when you feel compelled to reassure them, even though you did nothing to unsettle them. They repeatedly claim you make them feel certain ways without concrete evidence. You leave encounters with them feeling unusually exhausted. They treat you as the cause of their internal problems. You feel as though you have been turned into a distorted version of yourself. Projection works like darkness, subtle, silent, unseen, but its consequences are undeniably real. How to step out of the role of the mirror. They use, not by changing them, not by becoming more patient, not by forcing yourself to endure, but by recognizing this does not belong to me. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." C.W. Levin, Psychology and Religion. What we must do is not strive to become more positive, but to recognize that the darkness being cast upon us is not our own. We have the right to set boundaries. We have the right not to be anyone's container. We have the right to return emotions to their rightful owner. We have the right to protect our energy. After understanding projection, how others unconsciously use us as mirrors for their wounds, we begin to perceive an even subtler, more dangerous phenomenon, one that often arises in intense relationships identification. If projection causes us to carry another person's unconscious, identification causes us to lose our own consciousness. This is a deeper descent in the process of energetic leakage, and it almost always happens in silence. Let us continue to the next part. Part 4. Identification and the loss of ego. Boundaries. Carl Jung once wrote, "The loss of ego identity is one of the most frightening experiences a person can have." Collected Works, Vol. 9I. Yet what is even more frightening is this: many people do not realize they have lost their ego identity at all. When we become a mirror for another person's shadow, we gradually grow accustomed to receiving their emotions, holding them within ourselves, and adjusting who we are in order to reduce their inner chaos. Over time, the boundary between what is mine and what belongs to them begins to blur. And this is precisely the doorway into identification. We do not merely carry their shadow, we begin to become part of it. What is identification in Jungian psychoanalysis? Identification, according to Jung, occurs when the ego no longer stands firmly at the center, and therefore clings to another person to gain a sense of ownership, orientation, and safety. In love, deep friendships, or dependent relationships, identification causes us to dissolve into the other person's emotions, react on their behalf, think on their behalf, live their life more than our own, lose the ability to distinguish I from they. This state is not the sacred union many imagine it to be. It is regression, a psychological retreat, in which the ego returns to a primitive structure, seeking fusion with another person in order to avoid confronting inner solitude. Jung described regression as a backward movement of energy to an earlier and more primitive level of functioning. Collected Works, Vol. 5. When this happens, psychic energy libido no longer belongs to us. It dissolves into the other, and in that moment, we become an extension of their world, not our own. When the ego is weak, boundaries disappear. A mature ego knows who it is, what it wants, and where its boundaries lie. But a weak ego lacking foundation and self-definition seeks survival, by attaching itself to another. We merge with their joy, their sorrow, their chaos, their needs. We love not from freedom, but from fear of losing them. We act not because we want to, but because we fear that if we do not, the relationship will collapse. When boundaries dissolve, a harsh truth emerges. We no longer know where we end and where they begin. Our body reacts to emotions we did not create. Our heart aches for wounds that do not belong to us. Exhaustion lingers as though we are living two lives at once. Identification makes us more vulnerable to energy drain than any other mechanism. If projection places a burden upon us, identification removes us from outside the burden and places us inside it. It is no longer, "They are putting this on me." It becomes, "I am taking this in as part of myself." When we merge with another libido, no longer returns to nourish our inner world. Energy flows outward without being renewed. The body becomes exhausted, while the mind cannot explain why. We feel empty even while the relationship continues. This is the psychological depletion Jung referred to as ego dissolution, the melting of the ego into the object. And this is the most fertile ground for every form of energy, vampirism. Signs you have fallen into identification. You may be in identification if you feel responsible for the other person's happiness or suffering. You struggle to say no because you fear hurting them. You feel guilty for taking time for yourself. You react more strongly to their emotions than to your own. You feel controlled without knowing by what. You lose touch with your own interests, habits, and ideals. You live in constant tension, yet feel unable to leave. This is not love. It is an unconscious exchange driven by a fragile ego. Why do we fall into this state? Jung believed that all boundary loss originates in failures of early separation during childhood. A child who was never allowed to have independent feelings, thoughts, or needs grows up with a dependent ego structure. And in adulthood, that child merges with others to find the safety it never had. Jung wrote, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Collected Works, Vols. 16. These unlived lives are often passed down to children as patterns of dependency. We do not merge with another because we love more deeply. We merge because we were never taught that we are separate. How to exit identification and restore ego boundaries. Not by leaving the relationship abruptly, not by forcing ourselves to appear strong, not by pushing the other person away. The first step, according to Jung, is awareness. We must recognize what belongs to them, what belongs to us, which emotions we have mistakenly taken on, where our energy has dissolved into another. Then, we must return to the center of our being, what Jung called returning to the self. The self does not take people away from us. It simply returns us to our rightful place. When we stand firmly at the center of our being, boundaries begin to reappear. The ego becomes clear. Energy returns to nourish the inner world. And we are no longer pulled into another person's chaos. If this part reveals how we dissolve into others and lose our ego, then part 5 will reveal the opposite response, how the ego defends against weakness by inflating itself to save others. One path is dissolution, the other is inflation. But both signal the same truth: we are not centered. Only when we return to our center does energy stop leaking. And only then do love, kindness, and help become true light, not darkness disguised as virtue. Part 5. Psychic inflation. Saving others, playing the saint, while quietly leaking your own energy. When we speak of identification, the state of dissolving into another person in order to feel safe, we are already touching a fragile territory of the ego. But there is another phenomenon, more subtle, more deceptive, cloaked in what appears outwardly beautiful, and therefore far more difficult to recognize. This phenomenon is psychic inflation, the unconscious swelling of the ego when we assume the role of savior in someone else's life. If identification causes us to lose ourselves, psychic inflation causes us to believe we are more than ourselves. In identification, we merge with another out of fear of abandonment. In psychic inflation, we merge with the role of saving others out of fear of being insignificant. Two different mechanisms, yet sharing the same core. The ego is leaking energy in order to survive. Carl Jung warned powerfully about this phenomenon. Inflation is always a sign of weakness, for it indicates that an individual is too weak to hold the tension of opposites. Collected works. Vazal 7. When we are not strong enough to face our own imperfection, the ego inflates to conceal that weakness. What is psychic inflation? From a Jungian perspective, psychic inflation is not confidence, nor is it kindness. It is a state in which the ego expands beyond its natural boundaries, assigning itself a role that is larger, more important, even more sacred than it truly is. We become the one who must always heal others, the one who must fix every problem, the one who carries responsibility for everyone, the one who cannot afford to be weak, the one who must be strong so others can lean on them. On the surface, this appears to be compassion, but underneath, it is hunger for value. We do not save others because they need it, but because saving them makes us feel important. We do not sacrifice out of love, but because sacrifice makes us feel better than we are. This is not love. It is the ego fighting for survival. Why are we drawn to the role of the saint? Because the role of the good one, the savior, the selfless giver, is deeply addictive. It offers us the sensation that we are stronger, more noble, more special, different from others, worthy of love and appreciation. But Jung warned goodness that is forced upon the self is often a form of shadow. Collected Work, Volume 11. When goodness does not arise from the self, but from the ego, it becomes darkness disguised as light. It nourishes no one. It slowly erodes both souls involved. The savior-victim loop, where both lose energy. Psychic inflation never exists alone. It always appears alongside its opposite pattern, the victim. A savior inevitably attracts a victim. A victim instinctively seeks a savior. The loop looks like this: they need us to survive. We need them to feel valuable. What neither side realizes is that with every cycle, both lose a portion of their life force. The victim never matures because someone is always doing the work for them. The savior never rests because they are always carrying what does not belong to them. And the outcome is inevitable. They wither because nothing is ever enough. We collapse because we never stop. Jung called this unconscious complicity an unspoken collusion. Two people believe they are helping each other, while in reality, they are deepening the shadow in both psyches. Psychic inflation as a subtle form of energy. Leakage. When the ego inflates, psychic energy libido flows outward to maintain the role of savior. Preserve the image of being never wrong. Prove one's goodness. Carry the pain of others. Function as an emotional stabilizer. But every drop of energy that leaves the center is a drop that cannot be recovered. We do not become exhausted because we give too much, but because we give from the wrong place. The motive is not free love, but the egos need to be seen as good. And the ego, as Jung famously said, is a very bad master, but an excellent servant. Collected Works, Volume 9I. When it rules us, we become slaves to virtuous roles. Why is psychic inflation more dangerous than selfishness? Selfishness is obvious. Psychic inflation is not. A selfish person knows what they want. An inflated person sincerely believes they want nothing for themselves. Selfishness alerts us. Inflation fills us with pride, and that is far more dangerous. We believe we are doing the right thing, but in truth, we are fleeing from feelings of insufficiency, unlovability, and worthlessness. We use sacrifice to fill the void. But that void never fills. It is the ego's bottomless well. How to step out of the Savior. Roll and seal the energy. Leak first. We must dare to look at our motives, not our actions. Actions almost always look virtuous. Motives reveal the truth of the psyche. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes, collected works." Vampirism 11. When we look outward, we see someone who needs saving. When we look inward, we see an ego starving for love. Next, we must accept a difficult truth. It is not our task to save anyone. We are born to live from the self, not to become another person's psychological crutch. When we return responsibility to each soul where it belongs, we discover they grow stronger. We grow lighter. The relationship becomes more equal. We no longer inflate to hide our fear. We stand at our true size, neither larger nor smaller. And that, precisely, is what grants freedom to both. Yes, if this part shows how the ego inflates itself to save others and becomes exhausted, then part 6 widens the lens. Sometimes we are not drained by one person, but by an entire world attempting to define us, direct us, and consume our energy. Only when we see these invisible currents do we learn how to remain grounded in an age of constant disturbance. And more importantly, we learn how to choose what is truly worthy of our psychic energy. Part 6. The collective unconscious and the forces that drain us without being any one person. When we step out of the savior role and recognize that unconditional self-sacrifice saves no one, that it only inflates the ego until exhaustion sets in, we may believe we have escaped the greatest sources of energetic leakage. But as Jung continually reminded us, the darkness of the psyche does not reside only within individual people. It exists at a deeper, broader, and far more dangerous level, the collective unconscious. As a savior, we are drained by carrying the pain of one person within the collective unconscious. However, we may be drained by carrying the pain of an entire world. Jung wrote, "The larger the group, the lower the morality." Collected works. Volunta 10. He was not speaking of morality in the conventional ethical sense, but of the unconscious power of the crowd, the force that causes individuals to lose their center and be swept away like leaves in a storm. the collective unconscious, an ancient ocean beneath us. All Jung described the collective unconscious as a vast, invisible ecosystem containing archetypes, primal instincts, and psychic memories shared by all humanity. He referred to it as a psychoid reality, a layer of reality so real that it governs us without our awareness. Human beings are not influenced only by individuals. We are shaped by the collective psychological structures in which we live. And in the present era, what Jung described nearly a century ago has become unmistakably visible: collective complexes that drain our energy every day. No one needs to enter our personal life to drain our energy. Large systems, invisible yet powerful, now do this far more subtly. Consumerism. We are surrounded by messages telling us, "You are not enough. You are lacking. You must have more." Each time we compare ourselves to others, libido is drawn outward toward things that can never fill the inner world. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Collected Works, Volume 11. Consumption is a way of fleeing from the soul, and one of the fastest ways to drain psychic energy. 2. Social media. We inhabit a space where everyone performs an idealized version of themselves. We are pulled into unconscious cycles of comparison, self-justification, seeking validation, fear of being left behind. Each time we touch these fears, the psyche loses a portion of its vitality. We call it stress, anxiety, fatigue. At a deeper level, it is libido leakage. 3. Herd mentality and crowd effects. Within the crowd, individuality dissolves. We are no longer ourselves. We become part of the collective instinct, more reactive, more aggressive, more easily manipulated. This is why Jung warned, the unconscious is not only evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. Collected Works, Volume 9. The collective can awaken light, but it can also unleash the most primitive shadow. 4. Ideological conflict. When we are drawn into ideological battles, we believe we are defending truth. Often, however, we are defending the ego, losing energy to conflicts that do not nourish the soul. Psychological pollution. Exhaustion. Without a clear cause. What makes collective complexes dangerous is that we do not perceive them as we perceive a single person. We feel tired, tense, empty, pressured, without knowing why. Jung called this psychic contamination. It occurs when we absorb too much societal fear, too many external expectations, too much collective noise, too many imposed ideas of who we should be. We are not drained by one person, but by the invisible currents of the world itself. And this is why we can feel exhausted, even when no one has directly harmed us. The fear of exclusion, the root of exhaustion. One of the most powerful forces within the collective unconscious is the fear of being expelled from the group. This is not a modern fear. It is an ancient one, rooted in ancestral times, when exclusion from the tribe meant death. This is why our nervous system still reacts to judgment, criticism, conflict, silence from others as if they were threats to survival. When our energy is spent on being accepted, being loved, not being abandoned, that energy is no longer available to nourish the soul. We become prisoners of the collective gaze. The need to prove. Worth a bottomless trap. The collective creates very clear templates of value beauty, competence, wealth, intelligence, success, exceptionalism. And we chase these templates like mirages in the desert. Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." Collected Works, Vol. 17. If we do not know who we are, the world will eagerly define us in the way that exhausts us most. How not to be drained by the collective unconscious, not by leaving society, not by abandoning social media, not by isolating ourselves. Jung emphasized again and again, we cannot escape the collective unconscious, but we can refuse to be ruled by it. 3 essential steps. 1. Return to the center, self. When the self is strong, we are not swept away by collective currents. We remain steady at the center, like the hub of a wheel, while the world turns around us. 2. Reduce exposure to draining currents. Not everything we see deserves our attention. Not every debate deserves our participation. Not every judgment has anything to do with us. 3. Cultivate psychic hygiene. Just as the body requires daily hygiene, the psyche must be cleansed. Silence, meditation, journaling, withdrawal from the digital world, reconnection with nature. This is how we withdraw libido from the collective and return it to nourish the soul. If this part reveals how the collective unconscious carries us away like vast ocean currents, the next part will show how we can be affected by smaller ripples, the people standing right beside us. One is a massive current, the other, a subtle vibration. But both can drain us if we are not rooted at the center. Psychic resonance is not inherently harmful. It is a sacred aspect of connection. But when we learn how to hold our energy, we not only protect ourselves, we also help lighten the world around us. Let us move on to the next part. Part 7. Emotional contagion and psychic resonance. Vibes are not something to take lightly. After recognizing the invisible influence of the collective unconscious, where vast social currents drain our energy, even when no one is intentionally harming us, we move into a more subtle, more personal domain, yet one that still arises from the deepest spiritual layer of humanity, psychic resonance, or the energetic attunement between one person and another. If the collective unconscious is like a vast ocean in which we are all swimming, then resonance is the ripples each individual creates and which we unconsciously absorb. If in the previous part we were carried by the energy of an entire world, in this part we are shifted by the energy of a single person standing right in front of us. Carl Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Collected works. Vol. An encounter between two people is never merely an encounter. It is always an energetic interaction. The energy field between people is real. It is no coincidence that when we enter a room, we can sense its atmosphere before anyone speaks. It is no coincidence that some people bring immediate calm, while others feel heavy even before they open their mouths. Jung described this phenomenon through the concept of the psychic field, the subtle energetic field each person carries. Gentle or chaotic, safe or unstable, integrated or fragmented. All of it is emitted as a kind of frequency. We cannot see it, but we can feel it, like ultrasonic sound, inaudible to the ear, yet detectable by the body. A chaotic inner world emits a destabilizing frequency. A person carrying unresolved trauma, unprocessed complexes, and unconscious shadow will emit a highly unstable energetic field, rushed or erratic speech patterns, anxious eyes, a tense presence, a sense of absence, a heaviness surrounding their body, moods that shift like weather. They do not need to say a word. We still feel as though we are standing beside an overwhelming signal. Jung described this vividly. Complexes behave like independent beings, collected works. Volonate. When someone carries a living complex, we are not interacting only with them. We are interacting with the unconscious entities that govern them. And it is those entities that generate the vibes we sense. Why are sensitive people the most affected? Some people enter a room and immediately absorb every emotional state, present anxiety, pressure, irritation, fear, tension, as if they were sponges. Jung described such a psyche as porous, highly permeable. These individuals often possess strong intuition, have high empathy, read emotional cues effortlessly, carry a deep and imaginal inner world, yet have very thin energetic boundaries. They cannot easily distinguish what is their sadness and what belongs to someone else. They absorb everything, not because they are weak, but because they are open. Like an open window, welcoming fresh air, yet storms can rush in as well. Emotional contagion. Feelings spread like an invisible virus. In modern psychology, emotional contagion refers to the automatic spread of emotion between people. But Jung spoke of this long before science named it. He did not see emotions merely as personal psychological states, but as energetic phenomena capable of transmission and resonance. One anxious person makes an entire room anxious. One angry person thickens the atmosphere. One despairing individual leaves us inexplicably sad. This is not coincidence. This is psychic resonance in motion. Like two nearby strings on a musical instrument, when one vibrates, the other vibrates as well. Human beings function the same way. Without psychological defenses, we become antennas, absorbing the world. Those without clear psychological or energetic boundaries often experience exhaustion after being in crowds, depletion after listening to someone's sorrow, loss of energy around anxious individuals, emotional invasion without a clear cause, disturbed sleep after exposure to heavy energy. They do not realize they are absorbing others' energy and mistakenly believe all those emotions belong to them. But they do not. They are borrowed energies, and the body is struggling to digest what was never its own. When resonance becomes intense, we lose ourselves. If we remain unaware, resonance can pull us into another person's emotional world. Like a whirlpool, we react as they do. We grieve as they do. We become angry as they do. We grow anxious as they do. We forget our own center. Jung emphasized, the individual must differentiate himself from the collective psychology. Collected works. Volanager 10. If we fail to differentiate, we are not only swallowed by the collective, we are carried away by individuals as well. And this is one of the fastest paths to psychological exhaustion. How not to be overwhelmed by other people's vibes, not by becoming cold or detached, not by closing the heart, and not by avoiding all human contact. What Jung encouraged was consciousness of these invisible connections. When we know we are resonating, we are no longer ruled by resonance. 1. Strengthen the center. Self. A strong center prevents resonance from pulling us away. Like a tree with deep roots, the wind cannot uproot it. 2. Build energetic boundaries, not physical barriers, but inner ones, knowing what belongs to us, knowing what belongs to others, knowing when to listen and when to withdraw. 3. Choose environments and people carefully. Not everyone deserves our energy. Not every vibe should be absorbed. 4. Practice detachment with love. To love without dissolving. To listen without carrying. To be present without being pulled under. If this part reveals how energy spreads between individuals, the next part reveals who drains us most easily, not villains, but those who have not yet grown inwardly. They do not wish to exhaust us. They simply do not know how to live from themselves. And when we understand this, we begin to love more consciously, without fusion, without saviorhood, without blind sacrifice. Only when we preserve our energy can we stand steady among the unformed without losing our soul in the process. Let us move on to the next part. Part 8. Psychic immaturity. Those who are not yet grown within and unconsciously drain our energy. After understanding that emotions can spread like waves, and that the energetic field between people can resonate so powerfully that it destabilizes us, we begin to notice something more subtle. Not everyone who unsettles us does so intentionally. Not everyone who exhausts us harbors ill will. Many people drain us, leave us empty, cause our energy to leak simply because they have not yet matured inwardly. If a person's vibe can influence us so strongly, what happens when that person carries an underdeveloped, unstable psyche, one without foundation and without the capacity for self-regulation? Carl Jung once stated, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling." Collected Works, Volume 5. But when wisdom is absent inner insight, maturity, the ability to reflect thinking and feeling collide endlessly, creating chaos. And that chaos does not remain contained within them. It spreads to us. What is psychic immaturity? Psychic immaturity is not the charming innocence people often romanticize. It is the state of a psyche that has not fully formed, not knowing who one truly is, refusing to face one's own shadow, not understanding where emotions originate, lacking the ability to self-soothe, and being unable to take responsibility for one's inner world. They live through the persona, the social mask, rather than from the self. They react from instinct, wounds, and fear not from awareness. They engage with others not through the heart, but through unhealed gaps. Jung described this condition clearly. The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. Fittingly enough, a kind of mask. Collected works. Volume 7. Those who are psychologically immature live entirely within this mask, unaware of what lies beneath. They are not evil. They are simply not grown within. This is where many misunderstand. A draining person is not always toxic. Often, they are simply underdeveloped inwardly. They do not yet know how to comfort themselves, remain stable when life shakes them, observe emotions without projecting them, regulate themselves when the inner world becomes chaotic. So they require others to do this for them, like a child who needs a parent to soothe them. The immature psyche needs those around it to remain upright. But unlike children, they do not realize they are doing this. They believe they just need love, when in truth, they need others to complete the inner work they have never faced. They become emotional parasites. Without knowing it, the word parasite sounds harsh, but here it must be understood psychologically, an organism that cannot sustain itself and must rely on another body to survive. Psychically immature individuals drain energy in very specific ways. They need us to validate that they are right. They need us to soothe them when they feel unsafe. They need us to stabilize them when they panic. They need us to contain emotions they cannot hold. They need us to endure their mood swings. They need us to serve as their daily emotional anchor. We do not realize we are supplying energy because this exchange does not occur through words. It happens through the energetic field. We feel tired without knowing why. We feel low without knowing where it came from. We feel exhausted, yet cannot bring ourselves to leave. Not because we love too deeply, but because we are being pulled into the inner world of an immature psyche. Why are we so easily drained by them? Because psychologically immature individuals are exceptionally skilled at awakening our instinct to rescue. They make us feel pity, compassion, responsibility, as though we must be there to lift them up. They unconsciously activate the rescuer archetype within us. And as we explored in Part 5, when the rescuer appears, energy begins to leak. Jung warned, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. Collected Works, Volume 8. They are not addicted to substances. They are addicted to our presence. And we, in turn, become addicted to the feeling of being needed. These two addictions create a dangerous emotional bond, one we do not realize we are sustaining. Psychic immaturity versus The shadow. Immature individuals do not know they have a shadow, and so they never face it. They project constantly, shift blame, adopt the victim role, avoid responsibility, live in fantasy, cling to others to survive. They do not mature because they refuse to face themselves. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Collected Works, Volume 11. To awaken, they must endure the pain of self-confrontation. But they do not want pain, so they do not grow, so they rely on others. And we, the sensitive ones, the listeners, the empathic, become their unconscious energy supply. How to recognize those who are not yet grown within. They often shift emotions rapidly, become easily triggered or panicked, refuse responsibility for their actions, demand constant attention, feel unsafe when we create even slight distance, interpret difference as rejection, use emotion to influence others unconsciously. They do not do this to harm us. They do it because they do not know how to exist without attaching to someone. How to protect our energy around the immature. Not by pushing them away, not by cutting them off harshly, not by closing our heart. The path forward is one. See them clearly, neither idealizing nor demonizing. They are neither angels nor monsters. They are souls who have not yet learned how to stand on their own. 2. Stop playing the savior. We are not therapy. We are not parents. We are not containers for another person's emotions. 3. Establish emotional boundaries. Boundaries protect both us and them. When we remain steady, they gain the chance to stand for themselves. 4. Do not take responsibility for their growth. We can love, but we cannot mature for another. If this part reveals how the psychologically immature can unconsciously drain our energy, the next part will clarify the larger picture. There are archetypal patterns that cause certain people to become typical energy drainers, not out of malice, but because they do not know how to exist without feeding on the energy of others. When we understand this, we not only protect ourselves, but begin to see humanity with deeper compassion. A compassion with boundaries, awareness, and self. Let us continue. Part 9. Victim narcissist, complainer, martyr, archetypal energy, drainers in Jungian psychology. After recognizing that not everyone who exhausts us harbors ill intent, that many are simply inwardly immature, lacking self-regulation, avoiding their shadow, and disengaged from inner work, we step into a broader territory, archetypal personality patterns that unconsciously turn people into sources of energetic drain. If an immature psyche can unconsciously deplete us, what happens when that immaturity crystallizes into a fixed personality structure? This is where we encounter the victim, the narcissist, the complainer, and the martyr. 4 archetypal patterns that are not evil, not malicious, but shaped by wounds so deeply embedded that they require the energy of others to sustain their psychological existence. As Jung wrote, an unconscious identity is always a source of projection and conflict. Collected Works, Volume 17. When an unconscious pattern governs a person, it does not only create conflict within them, it pulls others into their energetic map as well. 1. The victim. Archetype: forever unhappy, forever suffering, forever needing rescue. The victim archetype is not someone who experiences hardship. It is someone who identifies with suffering. They do not tell the story of their life. They tell the story of their misery. The victim constantly broadcasts unspoken messages. I suffer so much. No one truly understands me. No one helps me enough. You're the only one I have. Most frightening of all, they do not want to change. Suffering becomes their home. Misery becomes their identity. If they were to change, they would lose the one role that guarantees attention and sympathy. In psychoanalytic terms, this is self-maintained suffering. Not because they enjoy pain, but because they fear losing the care and pity that feed their ego. Victims do not drain energy through forceful action. They drain it through emotional heaviness, negativity, helplessness, endless lamentation, constant emotional reliance. When we are near them, we slowly become an emotional reservoir. We try to help, and the more we help, the more exhausted we become. As Jung warned, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Collected Works, Volume 12. The victim never allows their roots to descend into the shadow, and so they never grow. 2. The narcissistic wound. When the ego inflates to hide. A wounded inner child. A narcissist is not confident. They are so afraid that they must inflate the ego in order to survive. Beneath the arrogance, beneath the control, beneath the demand for obedience, lies a deeply wounded psychological child unseen, unloved, never mirrored properly. Jung described narcissism as an extreme defense mechanism. Inflation is a compensation for inferiority. Collected Works, Volume 7. Narcissists drain energy differently than victims. Victims drain through weakness. Narcissists drain through manufactured strength. They require admiration, validation, compliance, constant attention. Without these, their ego collapses. We become exhausted because we must walk on eggshells, monitor every word, absorb projected rage, carry their hidden insecurity. Narcissists are not cruel, they are desperate. They attempt to contain their inner emotional void using the energy of others. But no one can fill a bottomless well. 3. The complainer, the one who drains through constant grievance. The complainer is not the same as the victim, though both are negative. The difference is this: the victim suffers because of fate. The complainer resents life for not meeting expectations. They complain about the weather, work, people, even the smallest inconveniences. Their complaining is not meant to release emotion, but to pull others down into the same frequency. Jung observed neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Collected Works, Volume 11. Complaining is a mild form of neurosis, a way to avoid facing deeper pain. And we, the listeners, become their emotional dumping ground, not because they believe we are strong, but because they do not know how to process emotion themselves. 4. The martyr, the one who sacrifices to create invisible debt. The martyr is the person who always says, "It's fine. I'll do it. I can handle it. Everyone can rely on me." They do not sacrifice out of love. They sacrifice to create emotional obligation, feel important, control others through guilt, preserve the image of being the good one. And after every sacrifice comes resentment. No one understands me. I've done everything for everyone. People only know how to take. The martyr drains energy through moral pressure. They make us feel guilty for not reciprocating their sacrifice. Jung described this pattern as inflated goodness. Nothing is more repugnant to the average man than to be presented with a shadow he has no wish to see. Collected Works, Volume 11. The martyr denies the shadow by being excessively good, and that excess suffocates everyone around them. 1. Root beneath them all. No individuation, no self-victims, narcissists, complainers, martyrs. They appear very different, yet all emerge from the same source. They have never entered the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming oneself. They live through masks, persona, wounds, complexes, insecurity, compensatory egos, unacknowledged shadow. They are not bad people. They simply lack the self, a stable center to which energy can return. When energy cannot return inward, it must seek supplementation from the outside, and we become that supplement. How do we avoid being exhausted by these archetypes? Not by condemning them, not by avoiding everyone, not by isolating ourselves. Jung taught that the first step is consciousness. Once a pattern is seen, it no longer rules us. We must recognize these patterns clearly. Stop playing the roles of savior, soother, or endurer. Refuse to allow our energy to be invaded. Maintain firm boundaries. And most importantly, stand firmly within ourself. When the self is strong, no one can drain us, not because they change, but because we are no longer easily pulled into their field. If this part reveals the archetypal patterns that turn others into energy drainers, then the next part takes us deeper still. Every form of exhaustion has a root within us, our own shadow. The other person is merely the catalyst. Whether energy is drained or preserved depends on how fully we have faced our own darkness. And this prepares us for the next stage of the journey, when we recognize the shadow. We do not merely protect our energy, we restructure our entire life. Come with me into the next part. Part 10, the shadow. The hidden force behind every draining relationship. In the previous part, we opened the wider picture of the kinds of people who drain our energy: the victim, the narcissist, the complainer, the martyr. But there is a deeper truth we cannot ignore. They do not exhaust us only because of their personality. They exhaust us because they touch what we most refuse to see within ourselves. This is the moment where the journey shifts from observing others to illuminating our own inner world. And there is no Jungian concept that helps us understand this more clearly than the shadow. In the previous part, we identified their pattern. In this part, we must face our pattern, because there is no energy drain more powerful than what we have rejected within ourselves. As Jung wrote in Ion, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The shadow is that unconscious part, the part we do not want to see, do not want to admit, do not want to name. 1. The shadow is everything we reject about ourselves. Any emotion we believe we should not have: anger, selfishness, the need to be loved, the hunger for power, jealousy, ambition, the longing to be seen, unresolved hurt. All of it gets pushed down into the depths of the unconscious. That does not make it disappear. It only makes it darker. Jung defined the shadow this way. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Collected Works, Volne 9I. The shadow is not evil. The shadow is the parts that were abandoned, excluded from the light of consciousness. We do not process them. We do not heal them. We simply throw them into darkness and hope they stay silent. But the shadow is never silent. 2. Those who drain us often activate the very shadow we fear facing. It is not random that some people exhaust us far more than they should. Not because they are too negative, not because they are too powerful, but because they touch a piece of us. They say something, and it strikes a fear we have hidden. They behave in a certain way, and it pulls up anger we have suppressed for years. They ask too much of us, and it awakens a craving for recognition we never dared to speak. They ignore us, and it triggers an abandonment wound from childhood we thought we had outgrown. The activated emotion does not belong to them. It belongs to our shadow, and they are simply the one who flipped the switch. Jung wrote clearly about this phenomenon. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Collected Works, Volume 10. What irritates us most in others is often what we have not reconciled within ourselves. This is why we feel offended, wounded, obsessed, even when their action is not objectively significant. They inadvertently become a mirror, reflecting our darkness back to us. 3. The shadow weakens us precisely where we believe we are strongest. Some people exhaust us with only a few sentences. Some ignite our rage with nothing but an indifferent glance. Some make us feel small, invisible, unworthy. When we react too intensely, too strongly, too quickly, it is not because they have power, it is because they touched the wound that has never been seen. The shadow is the area where we defend ourselves most fiercely. We defend because we fear touching it. But the paradox is this: the place we defend the most is also the place we are most vulnerable. We become easier to drain when we need to prove we are good. We need to be loved. We cannot bear anyone thinking we are selfish. We fear disappointing others. We fear abandonment. We fear facing our real anger. The shadow is not only what we reject. The shadow is what controls us without our awareness. 4. When the shadow is activated, we lose our energetic center. An energy drainer cannot truly drain us unless we leave the position of the self. The self, the center of the psyche, is a stable source of energy. But when the shadow rises, we lose balance, and we start moving with another person's emotions. For example, a narcissist touches the fear of not being good enough, we start proving ourselves. A victim touches the rescuer role. We rush in with unconditional help. A complainer touches the part of us that hates helplessness. We explode. A martyr touches the fear of disappointing others. We comply. We are not reacting to the person. We are reacting to our own shadow, just pulled up from the depths of the unconscious by them. As Jung reminded us in 2 essays on analytical psychology, the shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. The shadow does not want to be buried. It wants to be seen, acknowledged, reconciled. And the one who drains us becomes the messenger of the unconscious, even when the message arrives in a form we never wanted. 5. Why are we obsessed with the exact types we fear the most? Because the shadow carries an archetypal magnetic force. We are drawn to selfish people when we cannot admit our own needs, those who ignore us when we abandon ourselves, controlling people when we have surrendered authority over our own life, complainers when we cannot speak our real sadness, demanding people when we cannot set boundaries. The other person appears as an actor in an inner drama we have never written down. The shadow seeks to become conscious, and it does so by pulling the right kinds of people into our life. Jung described this as an ancient psychological law. The meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Modern man in search of a soul, the shadow does not merely react. The shadow transforms. 6. The hardest truth to accept. The one who exhausts us is not the problem. They are the lesson. No one wants to hear this, but Jung always brings us back to the starting point of inner responsibility. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Collected Works. Volume 11. We do not grow stronger by avoiding negative people. We grow stronger by understanding why they can weaken us. The shadow does not want us to live in darkness. The shadow wants us to look at it without running. When we do, we stop overreacting. We stop being exhausted by others. We stop chasing validation. We stop repeating the same painful relationships. We begin to enter individuation, the journey of becoming ourselves. The one who exhausts us becomes the mirror that shows us the part of us that has not yet matured. And when we see it, we become free. By now, we have traveled a long distance in this journey. How do you feel? As for me, I invite you into the next part, right now. Part 11. Repetition, compulsion, drawn to those who hurt us. yet believing they are the one for us. Freud called this repetition compulsion, but it was Jung who explored its symbolic depth. We keep repeating the same type of relationship, the same kind of heartbreak, the same kind of person, not because we enjoy suffering, but because the unconscious is trying to rewrite an old story. We meet someone emotionally cold, like a parent from childhood. We meet someone unpredictable, like the unstable environment we once lived in. We meet someone who loves us only when we are useful, like the conditional love of early years. And we believe that this time we will finally be loved fully, seen clearly, chosen, and kept. We tell ourselves, this time will be different, but an old pattern does not produce a new ending. It only repeats the pain. Jung wrote in Archetypes and the collective unconscious, what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. The person who exhausts us today is the replica of the one who hurt us in the past, only with a different face. The inner child, the child within, who clings to them. Inside every adult lives a child who never fully grew up. Jung called this the child archetype, the part that carries vitality, hope, and the longing to be loved unconditionally. When we enter a draining relationship, it is not the adult in us who clings, it is the inner child. The inner child hopes. This time, they will stay. This time, I will be good enough. This time, I won't be abandoned. This time, I will be chosen. This attachment is not logical. It is a silent plea from a trembling child buried deep in the unconscious. And because the inner child governs far more than we realize, we accept disrespect, being ignored, being drained, being treated poorly, being placed second to someone else's priorities. As long as, for a moment, we feel something that resembles the fragments of love from childhood, why don't we leave? Because we are not only loving the person, we are loving the chance to heal through them. This is the most painful secret of a trauma bond. We do not attach because they are good. We attach because our wound believes they are the one who can heal that wound. We do not need them to do anything special. We only need them to resemble the person who once hurt us. The inner child believes if I can make them love me, the wound will be repaired. If I am good enough, they won't leave like my parents did. If I try harder, I will finally have value. But the irony is this: the person who causes the wound to repeat is never the person who can heal it. The attachment of a trauma bond is not love. It is an energetic leak sustained by the fear of abandonment. Trauma bonds trade energy for the illusion of safety. Each time they give us a little affection, dopamine surges. Each time they withdraw cortisol spikes. This loop creates a biological addiction intertwined with unconscious patterns. But at the deepest level, what exhausts us is not the other person. It is the inner battle between the adult who wants to leave and the child who wants to stay. Jung described this as a split between the ego and the complex, where love rules. There is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. Collected works. Volume. So, the inner child is not seeking love. It is seeking power, the power to change the ending of the old story. It wants, finally, to be chosen, kept, and loved, without conditions. But when we try to change the draining person in order to heal ourselves, we enter a battlefield we cannot win. The result is energy leakage, eroded self-worth, constant mental tension, physical exhaustion, fragmented sleep, recurring anxiety, an ever-growing sense of not being enough. That is not love. It is an unconscious loop trying to complete a story that never had an ending. Awakening begins when we ask, which child within me is trying to be loved through this person? Not why do they treat me this way, but which part of me chose them? When the question turns him inward, the structure of the trauma bond begins to collapse. We realize we do not need them to heal. We no longer need to repeat the past. We can give ourselves what we once desperately sought from them. This is the moment the complex begins to dissolve. As Jung described, a complex becomes conscious when we are able to name it. When we name the wound correctly, it loses its power to run our life. If this part explains why we stay, then the final part gives us the tools to leave in peace and return to the self in wholeness. So now, let us fall away gently and come home to ourselves into the final part of this journey. Final part. Jung's tools boundaries. Shadow work and individuation. Turning. Being drained into a moment of awakening. When we realize that trauma bonds, the inner child, and repetition compulsion have kept us trapped in relationships that exhaust us, a new door begins to open. That door leads to a question Jung considered the first true turning point of inner maturity. If the pain keeps repeating, what can I do so that I no longer recreate it? And Jung's answer is never as simple as cut that person out of your life. Because in his analytical psychology, the problem does not lie in the other person, but in the psychic energy trapped within us, the unconscious parts we have not yet made conscious, the shadowed regions we have not dared to look at, and the personal authority we have not dared to claim. Jung wrote in Collected Works, Volume 11, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." This exact sentence was written by Eleanor Roosevelt. However, Jung expressed the same meaning when he wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown, not cutting, but outgrowing, not running from someone, but returning to yourself." 1. Boundaries. Psychological limits. The first line of defense of the self. Many people believe boundaries are acts of distance, coldness, or selfishness. But to Jung, boundaries are the spine of inner strength, the very foundation of the self. We are drained not because others are stronger, but because we do not know where they end and we begin. Jung emphasized in 2 essays on analytical psychology, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And part of that pain is recognizing the places where we never had boundaries, where we always explained, always endured, always sacrificed, always allowed others to cross into what was sacred within us. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are the skeletal structure of self-respect. They include recognizing which emotions are ours and which belong to others, refusing to carry other people's emotional responsibility, daring to say no without guilt, stepping out of the savior role, and ending the habit of making ourselves smaller to keep the peace. Without boundaries, the self cannot stand. And when the self cannot stand, anyone can become an energy drainer. 2. Shadow work. Reuniting with the parts. We once rejected, Jung wrote. In Ion, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Shadow work is the journey of bringing darkness into consciousness. When we are drained, we usually believe the problem lies in the other person. But Jung would ask, which part of your shadow led you to them? It may be anger you never allowed yourself to express, the need for validation you never admitted, the fear of loneliness you tried to deny, the desire for control you buried, or the longing for unconditional love you never dared to speak aloud. The shadow is not evil. The shadow is the abandoned part. And when it is abandoned, it finds someone who will give it a voice, often someone who hurts us. Shadow work means facing uncomfortable truths, ending self-deception, reclaiming power from old wounds. When the shadow is seen, we stop choosing relationships that drain us. We begin choosing relationships that reflect our new strength. 3. Inner authority and the self. where energy returns to its true owner, in the relations between the ego and the unconscious. Jung wrote, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. The self is not the ego. The self is the total center of the psyche. It is the place where we stand without needing external validation. Those who drain us hold power over us because we live through other people's eyes. We want them to like us. We need their approval. We allow them to define our worth. When we anchor ourselves in the self, we no longer ask permission to exist. We stop hiding our real needs. We stop living to please others. We clearly see the difference between love and dependence. Inner authority is what allows us to say, "I choose myself. I will not continue this story. I deserve better." This is not an attack on the other person. It is standing on our own side. 4. Conscious disconnection, withdrawing energy, while preserving respect. Jung did not encourage extreme severance or emotional escape. He spoke of conscious disconnection, withdrawing energy from a place that recycles pain, without resentment, without hatred, without labeling anyone as bad, not by ignoring, blocking, or disappearing, but by stopping emotional investment, stopping the search for their approval, stopping the hope that they will change, stopping the attempt to reshape ourselves to be loved, stopping self-blame when they cannot reciprocate. This is maturity, not avoidance. This is self-love at its most primal level, keeping your energy for yourself. 5. Inner alchemy and the path of individuation. As we mature through boundaries, shadow work, and inner authority, what occurs is a true inner alchemy, exactly as Jung described throughout his life. The pain that once destroyed us becomes the fuel that renews us. The wound that once led us into toxic relationships becomes the doorway through which the self emerges. And the relationship that once drained us becomes the harshest yet most honest teacher of awakening. Individuation. The process of becoming oneself does not occur when life is smooth. It occurs when we are forced to face what we once rejected. Jung wrote in collected works, Vampirism, there is no individuation without conflict, and the greatest conflict of all is between who we want to appear to be and who we truly are beneath the layers of persona and wounds. When we no longer live to rescue others, no longer fear losing someone, no longer sacrifice ourselves to be loved, no longer cling to trauma bonds, we become ourselves for the first time. That is a freedom no one can take away. Can you feel it? We have traveled a long journey together. If something very deep inside you, has just been touched. Softly, quietly, subtly, yet undeniably real. Something within you is moving silently, but strong enough to change the direction of an entire life, an entire soul. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And perhaps right now, you are beginning no. You have already begun to claim that privilege. Before you drift into peaceful sleep, I invite you to share just one thing, one insight from this video that revealed something about yourself, a truth you once avoided, a wound you have just seen, or a shadow you dared to name for the first time. Leave it in the comments. This is not only a dialogue with me, it is a dialogue with your own inner world, perhaps even a dialogue with Carl Jung himself. And if tonight's journey touched you, please leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, not for the algorithm, but so that on the nights you need a voice to guide you back to yourself, you know where to find it. I wish you a very deep sleep, very calm, very whole, and very peaceful. Until the next journey, I look forward to meeting you there.